So when you're making your own homemade TCG, the first thing you look at is other TCGs, whether that's mainstream TCGs like Hearthstone, Magic the Gathering, Yu-Gi-Oh, or you could be looking at the homemade TCG communities, say like Chaos Galaxy, Wrath of Kors, Rune TCG, Epic Underworlds, Mystic Islands, Afro Chibi Champs, or even Shard TCG. So if you have this grand vision of what exactly is going to go into your homemade TCG in terms of play style, summoning cost, game progression, card rarity, if you've got everything sorted, fantastic. But for a lot of you out there, you're a little bit lost, and I just want to go through another source of inspiration which I've mentioned in a previous Talk TCG, but I'm going to go through it in a little bit more detail in this video. Just a few examples I've got here. So the first thing you should look at is other TCGs and how they play. But once you've exhausted that well of knowledge, where do we look to next? Well, I would say another very accessible resource of research is board games. It doesn't have to be straight up board games. I mean, there are a lot of board games out there that don't use boards. Now, this is Saboteur. Now, Saboteur is a small card game, not a trading card game, but a card game all the same. And it plays a lot more like a board game than it would a TCG. So let me just go over the rules very quickly. See if it inspires you. You know, you might get some information out of this. So in Saboteur, you are dwarves and you are going through a mine and you have to get to the treasure at the end. But the issue is somebody in your group is the Saboteur. And the Saboteur's role in this game is to mislead you down other mine shafts. Because essentially what the cards are in Saboteur are tunneled mined cards. So a Saboteur can lead you off in the wrong direction. And of course the twist in the game is somebody can always just have a bad hand, which means they might not be able to put down the beneficial way to navigate to the treasure. So are they a Saboteur or do they have a bad hand? Now, how can you look at a game like Saboteur and decide to make that a trading card game? My first advice would be not to make a lot of tunnel cards, because people, they like creatures, they like other people, they like characters, they like heroes, they like villains. If you create a lot of just tunnel cards and winding things and things like that, it's not going to grab their attention. They want animals, they want animated objects. But in Saboteur lies the potential for a TCG. I can feel it. So the random idea could be to use the tunnels as energy cards. The more tunnels you have, the more energies you have on the field. Okay, so this makes the tunnel system a secondary thing to the main part of the game. Now, once you have a series of tunnels set up on the field, which would be your energy, that is a resource that you can then use to summon creatures. Now you put the creatures in the tunnel and you've created your own dungeon. Now it is a dungeon building TCG. Now for this concept of a TCG, do you have your opponent be a hero that has to traverse through your dungeon? Or are you two overlords fighting over dominion of this dungeon and you have to occupy the dungeon? You're hollowing out the tunnels and you're creating your dungeon. So naturally you'll have to come across each other and fight with the creatures that you move within your dungeon. Now for a concept for a TCG, this might have a lot of moving parts. I know with a lot of cards like that, you're going to need a big space, so maybe not the most practical, but that concept is enough to show that you can be inspired by things that aren't just TCGs to create a TCG. Now another example that I brought to you today is the Jurassic Park board game. Now this board game is essentially team building exercise. You know, you're trying to move around the map and avoid the dinosaurs. Of course, one player being the dinosaurs. Now, just for inspiring to have dinosaurs in the TCG, I say that's pretty good. But another thing that they have is action cards, which I know isn't completely original, but it is still an example of how we can draw inspiration from it. Of course, with a lot of board games, there are a lot more moving parts, where TCGs tend to be a lot more static. You play with rows or columns and everything is very very strict and rigid. You know, there's not too much moving around like in a map area. So perhaps if you're looking for something a bit different in your TCG, try to make it more flowing. But of course, try to keep the TCG feel. You don't want to lose that feel. You don't want people to feel like they're playing a board game. You want people to feel like they're playing a TCG. The two are similar, but different. Okay, so the next board game that I have to show to you today is Century Spice Roads. Now, this game I have not played yet. As you can see, it's still got the plastic on. I can't wait to dive into it. But it has a lot of cards in it. And essentially what the cards are used for is trading resources. Now, a trading card game. Have we ever come up with the idea of trading within the battle system? No, because it's scary, because you have your cards, and in some trading card games, those cards are very valuable. You don't want to be trading them with your opponent. You don't like your opponent having control of them cards. It's a scary concept, so maybe that is something we stay away from. But is there some sort of a neutral resource deck that can be built? I know it isn't practical, but it's different. Now, a neutral resource deck could be something that goes through phases of a game. Say you could have a phase of the game where one resource is cheaper than the other. And if you've built your army or heroes or creatures up to use a certain resource at a certain time, perhaps you can get it cheaper later. So now you're capitalizing on the phase of a game that is turning tides. Now, I hope I'm not losing you in these concepts, and if you're enjoying the video right now, please don't forget to hit that like button, as it really helps out the channel. It helps out me. You know, we've just hit 1,000 subscribers, and I'd just like to say a quick thank you to everybody who has been supporting the channel up to now. I mean, I really enjoy making these videos, and I know this one's a little different because I'm bringing in board games to it, but I am trying to tie it into TCGs to show that we can be inspired by other things. Okay, so next up we have Villainous, and this is a brilliant example of how you could make a TCG from a board game. Because the board within this game is a player-owned board. Essentially, you have a very small board to work with, and you have to move within this section. Let me break out the game, I'll give you a better example. So this is essentially your board within the game. Each player gets one. And we open it up here, and you can see there are different places on the map that you can travel to. And each place, you have access to different resources, and you can collect these within the map. So if I went to here, I can get 3 of these resources, which I can then spend to use my cards, as well as also having the power to discard cards and draw cards. And then the next turn, I would have to move to another section of the map. So this game is very much about mobility. But let me dive into the cards themselves to show you how you could be inspired by this. Now, what's really interesting about Villainous is that you get 2 decks. You get a white deck and a coloured deck. Now, essentially, the coloured deck is the one that you want to draw from. This deck will give you perks, minions, and other abilities. While the white deck, on the other hand, contains hero cards. Now, your opponent can spend points to draw from this deck and play them against you. But meantime, your opponent also has the white and coloured deck. So it's strange because you're playing with different decks, but your battle system is self-contained, if you know what I mean. You're only playing against heroes who is a villain to your villain that you've selected. So if we look at the idea of a Captain Hook deck, you're going to be up against things like a crocodile. Or if we take a look at a Maleficent deck, where we've got this really cool dragon art right there, you might have to come up against Aurora. Now, if you build 2 decks, one that works against you and one that works for you, of course you're going to stack the one that works against you with a lot of weak creatures. So in that idea of a concept, I probably would stay away from that. But what I do like about Villainous is the different characters' play styles. Now, this is something we could take to a TCG, and let me dive into this right now. So with Ursula, it is about collecting the trident and the crown to win the game. That is Ursula's objective, and your deck is built to work that way. Now with King John, he is all about greed and wealth, and he is about stacking up power. So once he reaches 20 power, he wins. Now, power is a very basic concept within this game. All the villains use power, but King John is about accumulating as much as possible, which can be tough because you need to spend the power to actually get further ahead, if you know what I mean. Now, the concept behind Captain Hook is to find the Lost Boys hideout, but as you can see by this little lock symbol, it can't be accessed right away. So Captain Hook has to gather the right cards to then unlock this. He has to get Peter Pan at the Lost Boys hideout, and then he has to defeat Peter Pan there. That is his main goal objective. And there are loads more villains to look at, but I'm going to let you do the research on that if you want to pursue it further. So what I'm aiming to get through to you is perhaps the idea of a hero card or a deck themed around a certain objective, or perhaps multiple win objectives rather than just take out your opponent's life or deck out your opponent. Villainous makes me think that perhaps you can make objective cards, something that is very difficult to do, that would take several turns to do. You can set the objective card and then you have to work towards that objective. So you're not as confrontational with your opponent. Your opponent's trying to get their objective. Maybe you do a little bit to try and push them back, but you're trying to work on your own objective. And it's more fresh and interesting if you look at a TCG that way, because instead of it being a typical fight, it's more like a race to the finish line. But when your opponent can influence the landscape of what you're racing on, then it becomes a little bit confrontational, but definitely not as confrontational as a typical TCG. So you've created something a little bit different. Now, the last board game that I have for you today is Bargain Quest. Now, this was an interesting little game that I saw at one of my local game stores, and I thought, ooh, I've got to have that. And my friend Richard, who also works on Shard TCG with me, actually got me this for, I think it was my birthday or was it Christmas? It was one of the two. It was a gift anyway. I'm pretty sure it was my birthday. So this game has a lot of cards, and I'm not sure if just looking at the front you can imagine what it is, but essentially you are a shop merchant and you have to sell items to heroes that come into town. Those heroes then go into the dungeon, and depending on how well they've done, you might get some extra points for that. So the game is partly about accumulating wealth, it's partly about helping heroes. But the main competition is who can be the best merchant within the village when heroes come to town. You also get to pick a nice item to put at your shop window to then attract the right kind of hero that you want. So if you want a mage to come into your shop, you put the big staff right at the shop window. Of course, that staff isn't for sale, but it's how you get them through the door, and then you can just sell them whatever after that. But if you're looking for inspiration for a TCG, I would say check out Bargain Quest, because it is packed full of neat little cards. There's loads of concepts. So in my hand, I have some of the cards from Bargain Quest. Let's see if this gets the creative juices going. So the first one up, I have Blasting Rod. Now, Blasting Rod, I think, has a nice design. I love like the little halo at the end of the rod. And of course, you've got like the flame in it. It kind of does what it says on the tin in terms of concept design. Very simple, very basic, but something that you would want to have. Now, next up, I have Tome of Peace. Now, this one I really like, because who doesn't like a nice magical book in your fantasy style trading card game? But also the idea of not just drawing any random book and actually having a shield on the book to portray that it is being peaceful. A shield is not a sword, you know, you're not trying to cause damage, you're trying to prevent damage. So it comes across artistically why you would go ahead with that design. Now, here's always a good idea if you're feeling a little bit lazy, you know, you're making your own TCG on your own, you've got to make over 100 cards, so you want to have a little bit of a day off. So what card do you design? Invisibility Cloak. Now, of course, you've got designs like a classic cutlass, but what's a little bit different about this is there's a hook on the hilt of the cutlass. I don't know if that is a concept taken from history, you know, is there actually a cutlass that has a hook, and does it serve a purpose in terms of combat? Let me know if you do know, just put it in the comments section, you know, educate me a bit. And of course, you've got to go with a classic fire scroll as well, but I really love how they did the red glowing writing for this one. It's very, very nice. Anyway, very simple designs, but very well done. You just need a consistent level of art, and you need a good theme behind it. If people get behind your theme, whether it takes you 5 minutes or 5 hours to do that piece of art, people will appreciate it. And of course, cat familiars, something that I haven't really thought about in my own TCG, is actually having a familiar to work alongside you where it could boost you or anything like that. So perhaps that is an idea that you can incorporate in your own TCG, whether it is a fantasy TCG or perhaps even a sci-fi. You could have like a little familiar in the form of a little drone robot or something like that, and it could just give you passive buffs. But as you can see from the size of this deck, there are a ton of cards to go through within this game, so I would recommend checking this out a little bit further online for design ideas and concepts, or even naming ideas. I know they don't get too elaborate on the naming ideas within this, but just the idea of using the word elixir instead of potion can be inspiring sometimes. If you are willing to open your eyes, you can be inspired by anything on a daily basis. This is only one resource that I have provided to you today. There are many more out there, and if you have any ideas for other ways you can be inspired by external resources, then put it in the comment section. Share it with the people. They are coming to this video because they want that knowledge. You can also offer them that knowledge. It doesn't have to be through me. It can be through you. You can inspire too. Now, one last thing I want to say before I sign off is something that isn't about board games, but what inspires me is when I go into a toy store, I will always go and look at the toy plastic models, because sometimes there are some really cool quirky concepts there, just non-brand toy models, like cool dinosaurs that are a little bit different shape than regular dinosaurs. I go, oh, that's great. And what I do, I get my camera out and I take pictures of the ones I like. There is one final resource that you can actually use. Now, I know that isn't a board game, but it is a little bit extra for you today. I hope you enjoy this video, and I'll see you guys next time. And if you haven't subscribed already, please do it right now, as it really does help out me. It makes me know that I'm doing the right thing, I'm on the right track, and I can continue to help you that way by creating more of these things. Okay guys, see you next time for another Talk TCG. I'm out.